All right. Hey,
All right, looks
Umesh.
like we're live. Hey, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you today?
Doing all right, doing all right. So,
Excellent.
everybody, welcome to our Sumo Logic Geeks and Gurus series. Today's topic that we're going to be talking about is cloud migration. My name is Umesh Rao. I am the Director of Solutions Engineering here at Sumo Logic. I'm joined here by Colin Fallwell. He's our field CTO here at Sumo. Folks, as we go through this, would love to hear feedback from you or questions from you. So please put that in the comments section. So let's just dive in, right? Colin, you
Yes,
have been
sir.
with Sumo. You've been with Sumo for about a year and a half, I believe,
Yeah, about
and
about a year and a
about a
half.
year,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
But yeah, you have a
go.
lot of experience previously before
Mhm,
Sumo. Would
mhm.
love to hear about that right off the bat.
Yeah, I think my journey into the world that we live in today started all the way back in like Novell. So I got certified Novell as an instructor. Went through Microsoft as an instructor. Went into consulting. Got certified in Cisco, built data centers, and as I got into that world, I really started to gravitate towards performance engineering, which led me to site reliability engineering, DevOps, and through all of that, back from the early days and frameworks for implementing things that Microsoft came out with and others, it just evolved for me into what I do now, which is really help organizations understand the complexities around digital transformation, cloud migration, app modernization, building telemetry into their pipelines, the feedback loops, and just really helping organizations become more efficient, more agile, so that they can innovate and compete in today's modern kind of like software-driven economy. I'll turn it over to you. You want to do a
Yeah,
quick intro?
yeah. I've been with Sumo for about 5 years at this point, and started off as an SE and went through the leadership program here at
Mhm,
Sumo. But prior to that, I have a, about a decade worth of experience in automation,
mhm,
and our main topic at hand, cloud migration. So that has been most of my IT career, I'd say.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
yeah. So let's talk about some of the key motivating factors that have caused people to migrate, right? Um,
Mhm.
so certainly we know that in the past couple of years with the pandemic, that has been a big motivating factor. But even before that, Colin, like what have you seen?
I think from the standpoint of the economy that we're in, I think you had a lot of organizations prior to the pandemic um, that had plans to adopt cloud and move towards the cloud, and we're still coming out of this world. There's a lot of customers that I talk to every day that are still largely on premise. They're monolithic. They're three-tier architecture, and when everybody went home, um, you know, eh, software services and solutions that were already in the cloud struggled to keep up with the demand. I remember in the early days, the telepresence solutions, particularly like WebEx, had really significant challenges the first 2 weeks just trying to maintain scale and provide enough compute and resources and to keep services healthy. Zoom struggled it early on, but you think about all the business systems and everything else that's in the back end. Not so much in retail, but when you start getting into all of the other verticals in terms of how businesses operate, it accelerated everybody's plan to move to the cloud. And as a result of that acceleration, a lot of capital spend went into like, let's just get things to the cloud quicker and quicker. So there's kind of been this mantra of like moving to the cloud has been more of a forklift effort to get things there. But then now I think organizations are really starting to get around this idea of like, okay, we got to start decomposing and building things in more of a cloud native way. There's a lot of challenges around customer experience. There's a lot of challenges around revenue, and maintaining reliability. You've got a broadened attack surface and security. So there's all these things that are starting to, I think, really impact IT and business overall. And trying to control cost, and at the same time, really shut down like the old way of doing things and get into a stable state where they can innovate and stay competitive. So you've got this massive, massive surge in adoption in cloud, and we see that across the board. I think in just about every vertical industry.
Yeah, and especially during the pandemic, we really noticed that even the supply chain, right? Not just, we're not talking just workload migration into cloud, but we're talking about the entire supply chain,
Mm-hmm.
VPN to all the other tools that we use on
Mm-hmm.
a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
That became more and more important to actually move into the cloud and make it more available, right? The
Mm-hmm.
entire
Mm-hmm.
supply chain became a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of supply chain, I think, given actual physical supply chain issues with hardware and such, that was another big factor for organizations to actually move into the cloud. Otherwise, it was hard to innovate otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, we got that covered. All right, we got some key motivating factors, but
Mm-hmm.
now let's talk a little bit about what it takes to actually move into the cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does planning look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an important thing, right? I mean, when you start to think about like how are you going to the cloud, I I try to tell organizations like or when I'm speaking to them and getting into like challenges and understanding like where's the pain and what are you going through. Most of the pain and challenges organizations are facing today come down to a few basic things, right? Governance, process and control. All of the technology in the world cannot make up for like the gaps in like people and process. Um, as you start to decompose applications and migrate to the cloud, one of the like really important things to do is like have a set of principles that are going to guide you to the cloud. You have got to make a really an uncountable number of decisions as you go through that process. What tech stacks are you going to use? Are you going to use Kubernetes? Are you going to use outsourced control planes like EKS or GKE? What clouds are you going to go to? What solutions give you the best fit and mix? What frameworks are going to use from a development perspective? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Regardless of all of those things, there are some basic principles and tenets I think that organizations have to like declare, and those are things like everything is going to be as code. We're going to go to a GitOps model. We're going to declare everything so that we can check in code, we can innovate, we can track backwards when things happen in production to an event, to a change event, to something that's going on. We're going to organizations moving to the cloud, planning to go to the cloud, have to stop and think about like how are you going to get telemetry out. All the cloud providers across the board provide a lot of native tools and capabilities for monitoring, observability, event, log aggregation, metrics, all of those sorts of things. But and that's great when you start. But when you scale and you start to move more and more into the cloud, and you have now all of a sudden you wake up and you've got 14 or 15 different cloud accounts and you're scaling horizontally across them, or you're having a particular problem in one region and you push the button and execute the scripts to pull up another region and deploy your cluster elsewhere. Um, and this is especially true in multi-cloud. Like you have got to think about like how are you going to acquire that telemetry? How are you going to bring it in? How are you going to analyze it? Because if you are spread out when there's a problem, when there's a crisis going on and you're dealing with an outage or something's going on, or there's an exploit, you think something's going on, having that data available to you and being able to look at it holistically, is a real legitimate need. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations, because they're coming out of this monolithic space, and they're coming out of the on-premise or in the hybrid environments where they maybe have been doing some containerization on-prem or in their data centers, and they're trying to move or migrate those workloads to the cloud. They overlook the fact that today most of that telemetry is acquired with proprietary agents. They're proprietary in the sense that they're vendor provided. So you're plugging in vendor code, vendor is aggregating that telemetry, putting it into their platform, and you might have 10, 20 different tools. I have organizations and companies that I talk to that still like have 70 or 80 different tools, tool chains, And all of those things are bringing, different data sets in different ways for different development teams. There's no organization, there's no coordination. And if you're an SRE or you're DevOps and you're responsible for everything that's running in production, in reality, if you look at the pyramid, like at the very top of the pyramid, this is what you have control over. And then below that is this massive pyramid, which is everything that you're responsible for. And if you don't think about like what are going to be the principles, the basic standards, the the Bill of Rights, and what are going to be the things that you put down as an organization and govern to say doesn't matter what you do, how you go about it, as long as you meet these tenets, as long as you can make these things happen. It's got to be observable. It's got to be secure. Everything is code. We're going to use a GitOps model. We're gonna invest and make sure that everything adheres to zero trust model. I mean, those models and frameworks are there so that you can really safeguard what you're doing when you go to production.
Right, and all of this, even though it sounds daunting, right? It happens over a long period of time, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't happen overnight,
Mm-mm.
and innovation takes time, and it could be for certain organizations, it could be a couple of quarters, maybe 6 months, 8 months, could be years, right?
Hmm.
And prior to the pandemic, even as you said, lots of organizations have been actually planning this for a while, and they've been starting to get into that mode.
Hmm.
Well, one of the byproducts is, as you said, lots of tools, and those some of those tools don't translate well into the
Hmm.
cloud, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
being able to actually have a platform that is able to bring all of those pieces together,
Hmm.
bringing all of those telemetry pieces together,
Mhm,
machine data, all of that together, it becomes key, right?
mhm,
In part of accelerating this process of going into the cloud, right?
mhm, mhm.
So speaking of which, monitoring, right? Talk about monitoring applications.
I mean, at the basic level, right? Monitoring applications comes down to logs, metrics, traces, and there's this other one in there in this melt formula, which is events, right? Um, and it doesn't matter like anymore. You've got DevOps on one side, and you've always had SecOps on the other side, and really, I like DevSecOps is really starting to be a thing in the industry. And the reason it's really starting to be a thing is that because as things become more declarative and autonomous and automated, and as development teams start to shift left and really take the ownership role of what's going on in production, your development teams have been agile for a while. Your security teams have always kind of been outside as the auditor, and as they're always historically been playing catch up. But now as everything moves to CI/CD and everything moves to, declarative, and you got like Terraform and Helm and all these, different stacks for, declaring things as code, so to speak. Um, GitOps has really taken off. And you know, as it relates to monitoring, like the old ways of doing things just don't work in the new world. There's a lot of proprietary agents out there that support things in like CNCF and open telemetry, but they do it through proprietary agentry. If you're going to go and you're going to start talking about monitoring the cloud, I see a lot of organizations now that are reaping the benefits of owning their telemetry. They're building observability into services. They're defining upfront with observability driven development. Like, what are going to be the signals that come out of my microservices so that I understand what's going on? That way, the services understand the internal state of themselves as well as other services around them that they rely upon in terms of dependency chain. There's technologies like OpenSLO, which is a way that gives you a structured code based way to declare service level indicators and objectives so that you can start building contracts between different lines of businesses and central tools teams and centralized services or shared services and third party providers and data providers, all the things that come in, and all of that kind of fits into this whole notion of supply chain. And you mentioned that, like, making the supply chain secure, being able to safeguard your production environments by declaring policies in code that are auditable, that have a track record as to who changed them and when they were changed, preventing them from being changed with like policy thing, watchdogs like in AWS, like Control Tower, those sorts of things. All of that, making it declarative and putting it into the code base gives you the capability not only to, programmatically configure how you observe things, but how you secure things so that unsigned images don't make their way into production, for example. Everything that goes into your repository, into your artifactory, it's got to be code reviewed, signed, it's got to be scanned. Okay, now that's what you can use, to the development organization. It's not safe to go and run all this stuff into the cloud when you're just pulling open source libraries down and you've never checked them. So there's a lot of things that go into that. But when you're monitoring in the cloud, like monitoring, if you don't have that right, if you don't get that piece right, if you don't have a robust pipeline that brings all of this data back in and does it in a way that you're not going to five different screens to figure out what's going on, looking over here for logs, looking over here for traces and maybe somewhere else for metrics, like some of the other competitors out there. Not to knock on Splunk and others, but a lot of the companies out there that have really tried to make a difference in cloud. They're just a bunch of collection of different products that were purchased, and bought up and acquired and bolted together, and so you just don't have a unified entity model. You don't have a way to bring in all this data into one pipeline that understands and can curate or develop an entity model that represents everything that you have in the cloud. And that's a disadvantage. And when you build your own telemetry and you do it in an open source way, and you use products like Sumo, you get the best of both worlds. You get a common data lake, a common entity schema. You get robust analytics because you're not limited by these silos of data or mismatches between one schema and one data type or one data source, or another schema and another type and another data source.
Yeah, really, it's about taking it to the next level, right? It's
Hmm.
taking it from just monitoring to actually diagnosing problems and troubleshooting problems faster, right?
Hmm.
Into
Hmm.
in a single pipeline.
Hmm.
That's what it comes down to. But one thing you did mention was, there are different silos in the legacy world. There are silos of teams that, maybe perhaps don't get to interact as much, and
Hmm.
they're essentially forced to get a little cozy when when cloud migration happens, right? They have to be able to communicate with each other. You
Hmm.
touched on that, and I thought I wanted to point that out once again. Um, Now, platforms. In the last 20 years that I've been in IT, I know technology has played a big part in improving process and people, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Even though that's the kind of the trifecta, people, process, technology.
Hmm.
Talk a little bit about what can Sumo provide to actually improve that process and people. I know you touched on that a little bit already,
Hmm.
but kind of to reiterate, how can a technology like Sumo can actually
Hmm.
improve process and people?
I mean, one of the big reasons that I came here, I spent 7 years, almost 7 years at App Dynamics prior to coming to Sumo. And App Dynamics was great for the enterprise space, but it had a really high total cost of ownership and a lot of stops and restarts for them to even get to a point where they could support cloud native technologies like open telemetry. One of the beautiful things, and I think one of the tenets that we've really centered on and focused on is like we are going to get rid of all the proprietary code. Like when you want to work with us and bring your data in, we're building a referenceable architecture and we're well on our way. We just released our open telemetry distro. It's now GA. And the beautiful thing about this is that you now have the capability to truly unify the data stream. You can bring all your logs, all your metrics, all your traces, highly enriched with all the environment data and discovery around it, the metadata, right? About the environment in which all of this telemetry is coming from. And so with that weaving of all of this telemetry into a unified stream. It's really a convergence of what used to always be separate data streams. Now it's a unified, coherent stream of telemetry, highly enriched, processable both upfront, like on the edge in the cloud. It can be post processed once it comes into our pipeline. There's a lot of things that you can do to it, but the main advantage, right, of all of that is that um, uh, organizations, can go out and they can own their telemetry. You can send it to us. You can send it to other places. Like everybody's going to start supporting OTLP as a standard in open telemetry. And organizations now don't have to rely on proprietary vendors to do the same things that traditionally APM has always, done kind of well. They've always abstracted the complexities in instrumentation and acquiring telemetry and having the control plane, if you will, for the remote configuration and management. And one of the cool things we're working on right now is this op-amp protocol for open telemetry, which is basically an open agent management protocol, which is going to give you the same capability to interact with the uh, dynamic libraries that instrument applications so that you can change the instrumentation layer. You can decide what you want in your spans. Span events is coming out. You're going to see call stacks, stack traces, those sorts of things making its way into open telemetry. The industry is maturing incredibly fast, and our focus, I think, we see all of that getting commoditized. And why would you go in there and put in proprietary agents with a bunch of technical debt that you have no control over? Versus going with open source agents that are open source that the whole globe is contributing to. Developers across all of our competitors are contributing. We're working collaboratively to come up with better solutions so that all of us win in the end in terms of being able to build that feedback loop and that pipeline back into the development organization. And the beautiful thing about all of this, I think, is that at the end of the day, um, uh, you're pushing all of this control into the developer. They're no longer repelled by the fact that they are not in control of their destiny when it comes to telemetry. And as developers take that on, now you've got stronger alignment with the business. And in fact, the business gets the advantage of having this immutable data lake of information. They don't have to extract and pull it out and transform it or get copies and copies of data for their BI teams to do their things. So it's accelerating digital transformation. And as you move to the cloud, right, you can't scale adequately with solutions that really weren't born in the cloud, because cloud native requires kind of cloud native. Like you've got to be able to scale almost infinitely because you never know from 1 minute to the next where you're going to have a terabyte a day in telemetry versus some big event like the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden now you've got 500 terabytes of data coming in a few hours, and you need to be able to treat it the same way. You've got to have the same service level agreement on like how long does it take to process that data. So the vendors have that you're working with in the cloud, that changes, right? They've got to be able to scale to the kind of demands that you're going to have. So.
Right. Yeah. And I know we've been talking about cloud migration from kind of on-prem legacy to the
Mhm,
cloud, but it could be cloud to cloud. We've seen that happen
mhm,
as well. I have customers that I work with that have done a cloud to cloud migration, right?
mhm,
And not to
mhm,
mention, large industries. There's never one cloud. It's always a multi-cloud
mhm,
conversation.
mhm,
So even though individual clouds end up having their own specific tools, right? The problem is that they have their own language, so to speak. They have
mhm,
their own
mhm,
metadata tags,
mhm, mhm.
and having a platform that will allow you to kind of elevate and abstract that layer up
Yeah.
will help you go across platforms, across clouds very, very quickly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
to that point, right? It's like you have to normalize the data, right? And
right.
if you think about it, like all of the different tool chains and stacks, app stacks, and all this stuff, like all of this has different descriptors for what it is, metadata, meta about the data that it's bringing in.
Yep.
You've got to be able to way to like align that up and normalize it, because without that normalization, you can't pipeline process and run machine learning and outlier detection and see the correlation between different entities unless you have that ability. And it's one of the things I really love about, kind of how we look at things and do things, because it just gives, it gives customers the ultimate control over like being able to bring all of that together and look at it as like one interrelated set of entities, and run outlier detection very, very efficiently.
Exactly. And if and when a switch happens, um, have it be a cloud vendor or some SaaS vendor underneath in the IT
Mhm.
supply chain, things shouldn't look different. Why would it look
Mhm.
different, right?
Mhm.
Being able to have that ability to make it look the same, at least at this layer, right? Um,
Mhm.
that is the power uh, of Sumo for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And on the
Maybe I'm a little
organizational
biased.
side, no, I mean, on the organizational side too, like even abstract away like the vendor stuff, right? I mean, from a referenceable architecture standpoint, if you're going to be multi-cloud, you have got to create a metrics library. You've got to be able to visually represent and look at and stare at for a while, like looking at like, okay, these are all the metrics and these are all the time series that I'm getting out of this cloud provider. And these are all the time series that I'm going to get out of this provider. And like, how do I match those up? Because how do I look at that as one cohesive thing? We do a lot of work on our side, right? Just within our apps to be able to abstract that complexity away. But it goes beyond that when like you're talking about doing custom metrics and things of this nature as you get into different types of stacks and infrastructure as a service, or platforms as a service. All the platforms operate a little bit differently, so you're going to have different time series metrics that are coming out all these different platforms. And it may be the same thing. They may be relational databases in the cloud on two sides, but you got vastly different ways of labels of things that you need to look at, but they're essentially the same thing. You've got to normalize all of that and think about like, what's that framework going to be like? What's that reference architecture being able to go up and then migrate to another cloud or go multi-cloud?
Yeah, exactly. I know we're a little over
Mhm.
time here. That went fast. I wasn't
It did.
expecting that. Clearly, Colin, you and I can probably talk about this the entire afternoon if we had to, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, this is our inaugural Geeks and Gurus series on LinkedIn Live. For everybody that joined us today, we're on the back side of this. We have no idea how the quality was getting broadcast on this live stream, but hopefully it all went off without a hitch. And come back and join us for many more of these as we dive into all sorts of different and interesting topics on automation, cloud, DevOps, SecOps, and stay tuned. Appreciate everybody's time today.
thank you very much. And Colin Fallwell, thank you very much. And this is Umesh
Thank
Rao
you very
signing off.
much. Take care,
Thank you.
Umesh. Bye bye.